and a very warm welcome to the first ever Royal Automobile Club talk show in association with Motorsport. I'm Ed Foster and I'm the online editor of Motorsport magazine. In the background here we have Alan Hyde, the audio guru, and so if you've got any complaints about the audio, please see him. Complaints about everything else can come to me. Thank you. So, these new talk shows, we're going to be doing a series of them, and we're going to do 9 this year, and we're going to be dipping into the world of motorsport, from Formula 1 to sports cars and even motorbikes. And along the way, we're going to have some absolutely fantastic guests for you. But before that, a little bit more detail on what these are. Some of you will probably be thinking, well, this is just a podcast. You're right. It's a podcast, it's a talk show, it's a chat show. It's ultimately a non-live radio show, which means that we record them. Alan takes out all my mistakes, and then they go up online. Yes, they go up online. If you're listening to this, you obviously know how to get it. But for future reference, you can listen to them on SoundCloud under the Royal Automobile Club, and you can even watch us on YouTube, and again, search for the Royal Automobile Club. You can get to them through the royalautomobileclub.co.uk website, and I'm sure you'll find them on their Facebook and Twitter profiles. Now, I mentioned some great guests this year, and we are certainly going to start in that manner. Next to me, I have Nick Fry, the former CEO of Honda Formula 1, and Ross Brawn, the mastermind behind 8 Formula 1 World Championships. Why, you ask? Well, the reason behind that is at the end of Honda F1 in 2008, a new team was born, Brawn GP, and these two were the masterminds behind that. Today, we're going to talk about the demise of Honda, the rebirth of the new team under Brawn GP, and those 2 amazing world championships for the constructors and the drivers in 2009. Nick and Ross, a very warm welcome to the Royal Automobile Club at Woodcote Park. Very kind of you to join us. I know you're both extremely busy, and just been hearing from Ross, obviously you only got back to the UK yesterday, so very kind of you to join us for this chat show. I'm going to, obviously we're here to talk about 2009, but I wanted to wind things back a little bit, and I've, because this is a sort of talk show, I've printed off some photos. It will make more sense later, hopefully. I've got an image here, and this is the launch of your 2008 car. Ross, you're quite new to Honda. How much work went into this car? Because I've been reading that you arrived and that the regulations were going to change at the end of 2008, and there was this big opportunity, as you saw it, to put all the focus on 2009. But surely there must have been quite a lot of work on this car.
Well, I joined at the end of 2007, and the team had been through quite a difficult spell. But I think they'd recognised some of the thing by themselves. They'd recognised some of the areas they had to focus on. I came to team with my ideas from Ferrari, previous team, and tried to steer them in directions. But the fact was, the car, cars are conceived over several years, in fact. But certainly they come into fruition. They start to come into focus the year before they raced. So this car was really conceived and developed during 2007. I think there'd been a recognition of the areas, as I say, that needed to be improved. So the car was a step forward over what had been before. I think one of the big things I was able to bring to the program was some references, because at this stage, I think it's fair to say there was some disagreement between the chassis group and the engine group over their contribution to the poor performance that had gone on before. And I think also there was a belief, certainly from Japan, that there was some sort of silver bullet that I could bring to a team and just apply, and there would be a step change in the performance. And that's not the case. Formula One's pretty challenging, complex business. And it's as much about culture and philosophy and approach as it is about some unique idea or some unique solution. So I think the fact I was able to bring a reference and say to various groups, I don't think this is good enough, or this is probably compares to what I'm used to, and make sure the attention got focused on the areas that needed to be improved. I mean, we talk about the engine. There was certainly a belief in Japan that the engine was competitive, and when I arrived and I saw the numbers and made the comparisons, it wasn't. So at least there was then a recognition of what needed to be done. So and that process started pretty much. I think there was a lot of opinion in the team about what needed to be done, and I just helped to solidify that opinion, just to make sure that clarify the situation from what I knew from my previous teams, where the references were, how good the engines were, etc., etc. We could at least start to focus then on what were the important things. As you said, 2009 was a great opportunity. And once we got 2008 running, my priority, quite frankly, was to then get the design resource, the development resource, the engine group, everyone focused on 2009, because that was where I felt we could make the step change.
No, you were obviously there before, and how was it, first of all, dealing with Honda? Ross alluded to it there, and also, what's it? Try and explain what it's like to go racing with this car, knowing that really all your attention's on next year. Is it quite a frustrating thing from a competitive standpoint?
I think I was there from 2002, and I think the two observations. One is, as Ross has just said, I don't really think we ever really understood why we were good when we were good, and why we were poor when we were poor. And even when we had, obviously a decent season in 2004, the car just works pretty much straight away. And it was a nice little car. It was very benign. The drivers liked it, and we did very well. A long way behind Ferrari, but better than all the others. 2006, obviously we managed to win a race, but after changing the wheelbase of the car. But again, I think Ross's point about really not having any decent references is quite correct. And Ross is again correct that there was, at times almost open warfare between the chassis team and the engine team. We all believed that the engine was poor. I think the indications from the other teams and from the FIA, such that we got any, was that the engine was far from the most powerful, but also quite difficult to drive. And I think when Rubens came from Ferrari, he made some very good observations about our engine versus the Ferrari engine. But we had a good team, and the thing that Honda was outstanding at was investing in the right things. And Honda's a great engineering company, and when we went and asked for a new wind tunnel, engineering facilities, when we wanted very expensive machine tools, they always said yes. So I think Ross will confirm when he arrived, the thing we did have was quite good facilities, so we had a good sort of basis to work on. I think that 2008 wasn't really too much of a frustration, because I wouldn't like to say we threw away the year, but we knew it was a building year. And I remember when Ross and I were discussing him joining the team, it was really, 2008 we'll kind of start to get our act together. 2009 put in some decent results, and then maybe the year after that we'll have an opportunity at doing a bit better and winning races. So there was always a 3-year plan. As it happened, things turned out completely differently. I think the team generally was always well motivated, and it's interesting that the people who weren't very good in 2002 are exactly the same individuals in the team that did very well in 2004, that won the first race in 2006, and then went on to winning consistently in the last few years. So it's the same idiots that were the failures at Honda that are now the very successful people in Mercedes.
Yeah, but picking up on some of the next points, I think it's quite correct. The team had built a great facility and had great people. I mean, one of the things that attracted me to the team was, from my perspective, it was underperforming in terms of results with what was a very good budget and a very good facility. So there was a lot that was right within the team. A lot of very good people, and it's one of the things that I always found more fun and more rewarding to go to teams and use the ingredients they have to become successful. And there were some great, and still are some great people in the team. There was no necessity to go in and clear everyone out and start again. You know, the chief race engineer, Andrew Shovlin, then, who was a junior race engineer, is now the chief race engineer now. And a lot of the manufacturing people are still there now. And they've got 3 world championships behind them. So, the core of it was very, very good. And the difficulty was the lack of cohesion between Japan and the UK. And as Nick said, they'd slipped into this blame culture, which had to be sorted. And I, Nick will recall, I discussed with Nick and then discussed with Japan joining a team, and the vital thing for me was carte blanche to be able to try and control and influence Japan as much as the UK. So the whole thing, we tried to pull together a cohesive program, and it was a car. It wasn't an engine, it wasn't a chassis. It was one entity, a car, and that had to be the mantra for us to succeed.
Which is ironic given what happened obviously in 2009 and the other engine coming in.
It did. Yeah, it's true. But if you look at what Mercedes have now done, which is, originates from this team, it's a car. And immediately Mercedes got involved. The key thing was to make it one team, chassis and engine. And with the new rules that were then coming along in 14, that was even more vital. There was a really comprehensive integration of the group, and it was a group that succeeded, not an engine succeeding or a chassis succeeding. But that's another story, because of course when we got involved with Mercedes, McLaren were the key partners.
Well, just briefly before we move on, do you think you would have, after your very successful spell at Ferrari, would you have gone to any other team apart from Honda? Because you obviously been saying they had the great facilities, they were underperforming, they had great people.
I paid him the most.
Well, there we go. For all you wondering.
Yeah, that helped. But seriously, it had great facilities and a great budget, and those are two things. Particularly facilities is difficult, takes time. You decide you're on a wind tunnel. It's a 3 or 4 year program to get a wind tunnel, and Honda had a very good wind tunnel at Brackley, and they had the budget, and that's a vital ingredient as well. I mean, budgets aren't automatic success, but nobody really wins world championships consistently without a good budget. And in a way, we were the exception in 2009, but the investment for 2009 had come prior to that. So for sure, Honda was probably the only team that I would have been interested in coming back into Formula 1-4, and I was very glad I did.
I don't know if you'll remember this, Ross, but end of 2007, after a number of telephone calls through the year, really, Ross eventually agreed to come round to my house at Woodstock, and I remember to this day, Ross came in and we sat in the dining room, and Ross said, "Look, I'm sorry to be presumptuous, but I've only got 3 questions. Not sure you remember this." And the first question was, "What facilities have you got?" And I couldn't take him to the team to show him round. It would have been a bit obvious. So I prepared a spreadsheet which has the detail, and we've got this wind tunnel, and we've got all these machine tools. So I passed it over to Ross and said, "Well, you can't have this, but read this, and this is what we've got." And he went through it and obviously appeared to be satisfied. And the second question was, tell me about the people you've got. And I had an organisation chart, and we went through Andrew Shovlin and Ron Meadows and Jock Clear and all the other guys. And Ross appeared relatively satisfied with that too. And the third question, as Ross has just said, was, "Well, what's the budget?" And I told him what the budget was. And I think then, Ross, you said, "Well, I've heard it from you, but now we need to hear it from the owners. And I think we got on planes the following week, different planes to Japan, and we spent a couple of days in Japan, didn't we, if I remember rightly? And he heard it from the horse's mouth, and well, I guess the rest is history.
Yeah. I'm going to sort of go from one Honda meeting to another, and I've done a bit of maths, and that's always a dangerous thing, but I think I've got this right. Today, which is Wednesday, if we rewind 8 years, 3 months and 18 days, it takes you to the 28th of November 2007, which I don't know if you remember, but it was the day, I think, when you both went to Heathrow to meet all the Honda executives. And this is the end of 2008, season's finished, and I think you knew there were going to be some cuts. But they then dropped this bombshell that they wanted to put out a Formula One with immediate effect and literally turn the lights off at the factory. Nick, it must have been a huge shock.
Yeah, I went through my diary actually, Ed. I'm very impressed actually. No, your sum is exactly right. I'm super impressed with you. It was the 28th of November. Now we'd obviously Lehman Brothers had gone down in September. I think everyone knew the situation was poor, and we prepared for that eventuality. And Ross and I had spent a long time with the finance director and the others going through what we could cut back, and we put together some budgets which cut back by, I think one of them was about a quarter and the other one was 40%, so they were large amounts of money. I have to say we weren't expecting what happens, and we got called, Ross and I, to see our boss at the time, who's a gentleman called Mr. Ashima, who was someone we I think both got on with very well, and we went to a not a great hotel. I'm not sure it's even there now, called the Renaissance. I remember we went into a fairly small room, and Mr. Ashima, the thing about Honda is that they have got emotion, and they've got passion, and they've got passion for racing. And Mr. Ashima was clearly very distressed. And I do remember he went through speaking very quietly that the financial situation was as it was. American dealers were refusing to take cars into stock. They were having to consider stopping plants working, which eventually the Honda plant at Swindon, I think, was closed for 6 months, and that the board had decided that they couldn't possibly continue doing something as outward facing and as showy as Formula One. So kind of that was that, and that was said with tears in his eyes. I mean, he was genuinely extremely upset, and it was obviously a big shock to both Ross and I. We then went through to a larger conference room where there were, I would say, probably 20 Honda people, weren't they? That obviously prepares, all sorts of human resources and what have you, and other people for the discussion. And after some discussion, it was agreed that obviously one couldn't just shut down the team. That we would have a month to start with to try and find new owners, to try and sell the team, to try and find another way of continuing, and that's the job that we got given.
I think we persuaded them, didn't we? Because their view was that we could go back and turn the lights off, as you said.
I was being kind there. They did say, "Go shut it down." Ross is quite right.
I mean,
and we just said, give us some breathing space. Can we try and sell the team? Can we try and do something with it? And they were very, very sceptical, almost scoffing at the idea that there was any way forward, because
or there was any value in it. I mean,
and it was, the situation was so dire overall, not just with the team but overall, that I think they just and to their credit, they gave us a modest amount of money to carry on through the winter, because as you know, the procedures for making people redundant, there's consultations got to go through. It's not you can't just turn everyone out on the street these days, quite rightly. So there was a procedure. We had to notify the people. I think it's 3 months, isn't it? Or can you remember? Yeah. So there was some by default some breathing space, and we said, just give us that time. Let us carry on working in that time. And I think we managed to persuade them to put another 2 million in to keep us going. They had to pay the wages anyway, but a couple of million just to keep going for that couple of months. So there was still, if there'd been no car available at the end of that period, then there definitely was no future for the team. There couldn't be, because you wouldn't have a car to go racing with. So we did manage to persuade them, and to their credit, they were a bit shocked at the request, because they really did think, go back and turn the lights off, because this is it.
It's amazing to think now, certainly with recent events in Formula One, and you hear some teams not paying the bills and things like that. Honda, who were in such a desperate situation, agreed, to keep the wages coming through, despite the fact they wanted to just turn the lights out and be done with it. I mean, hats off to them from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that Honda's a good company. There is, no doubt, it's a great engineering company, and it's also one with, strong values, and they did give us a chance, and we'll be forever grateful for that. But it was a tough call. I mean, the following month or so, I think between Ross and I, we saw every chancer, charlatan.
Well, it was going to be my next question. Actually, was I've read varying reports of 100 people who wanted to buy it, or 50 or 10. I mean, obviously there were the chances. How many realistic opportunities were there? Because there's not that many people in the world who want to buy a Formula One team, whether it's a manufacturer or a private equity firm.
I think Ed, the reality is, there wasn't anyone in reality, which is why we ended up. I don't think it was in Ross's mind or my mind, in our wildest dreams, that we would end up owning a Formula One team. It just ended up happening by default. I mean, we probably ended up speaking to about 20, I would say, different groups of people, but there wasn't anyone there who was really Honda didn't want to just hand it to anyone, because it would have looked even worse then. I mean, shutting it down was one thing, but handing it on to someone else who was then going to, not look after it, and it was going to shut down thereafter, was probably even a worse reflection on Honda, and they were very, very conscious of that. And a lot of people we saw were dreamers who had no real access to the money, or people who saw it as a potential opportunity but really had no intention of continuing the thing, or people who felt that they could get money out of Honda or split up the assets or do whatever. So I think the reality is we spent an enormous amount of time over the whole of January trying to find suitable people, and there wasn't anyone that the Honda were comfortable with at all, and there was no one I don't think that Ross and I were particularly comfortable with, because we would have had to be sold with the team. I mean, they wanted someone obviously to run it for them, and
you tend to think in Formula One you've seen everything, and then suddenly we saw the rest of the world, if you like. And we had several crooks and fraudsters go quite a long way. I mean, one guy flew in with his helicopter, the whole thing, and wanted Nick and I to go for dinner with him in the Ritz, and he's had a house near Harrods and all this sort of stuff. And he was a fraudster. He's in jail now.
The helicopter was so big that even though we had a helipad, it wouldn't fit on the helipad, so we had to clear a car park. And everyone was very determined to find out where the helicopter came from, and it was registered in San Marino or somewhere, and no one could identify, from where it came.
So what's that film with Nicolas Cage in it when he rents a private jet and it's newly painted, and he's just painted on this fake company logo on the side, and as it takes off, you see the paint peeling back to reveal the rental airline. It sort of reminded me a bit of that.
Well, it was almost like that, and and we discovered because obviously anyone who was seriously interested, Nick and our legal director and finance director got involved in checking their background, and we discovered this guy was a crook just before Christmas. And I remember sitting in Nick's office and ringing him and saying, we just had a report from our investigators to tell us that you're a convicted fraudster and you've changed your name. And he said to us, how much will it cost for that report to disappear? Really? And those are the sort of people
this is like a thriller novel. I knew today was going to be exciting, but it gets better and better.
Firstly, there was a huge denial, And then when we were, again, being very sort of politically correct about this, and we said we found out things that, would prevent us continuing with the conversation. And he blustered and said it was outrageous and what have you. So then eventually we had to tell him what we'd found. And he had been selling hereditary British titles to Americans. And I got convicted in America of...
It's a niche market.
Of doing that, which clearly profitable, obviously. But and then, as Ross said, when he, when we told him that we'd found this particular thing, he said, "Well, I was very young at the time," which didn't seem to be much of an excuse. And then the next question was, does Honda know? And so we said, well, they don't, because it's Christmas Eve and we've only just got the report. And as Ross said, how much does it cost to keep it from them? And no, it's we wouldn't do that. And cheerio, goodbye. And as Ross said, he got banged up sometime later. So I'm not sure where he is now. Probably still at Her Majesty's.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he had a huge property empire in London, which he showed us, and we had people look at that side, and it did exist, but he got all the finance for it fraudulently from the banks, the Irish banks, which is where the Irish banks obviously got into trouble in that period. So, but anyway, there were a number of people like that just came out of the woodwork, and luckily we had enough wits about us to spot them eventually. Maybe we didn't spot them straight away, but Honda had given us the opportunity but authority to sell the team, and as Nick said, the last thing we needed was to sell the team to somebody who was unsuitable, who could cause a lot more problems than just shutting it down. So it was quite an interesting period and quite an educational period, and in the middle of one of the worst financial crises in recent history. So it was all good fun.
In hindsight, probably. I think obviously you've got all this going on. You're trying to sell the team. When you're also, you're trying to keep everyone sort of protected at the factory. Trying to keep them working on the next year's car. You've also had to tell Rubens and Jensen as well. So firstly, how did you keep them from disappearing? Did they want to go and find another car? I guess by then there were no seats left, so they were in it with you, weren't they?
Well, I guess in some ways that was a slightly fortunate thing. It was so late that there wasn't any good opportunity, and Rubens wasn't committed at that stage. We were still undecided about whether Rubens was going to stay with the team. Jensen was. He had a new contract, so which gave him some financial security, because obviously Honda, as Nick said, are an honourable company and they would have met their commitments. But but then not driving would have been a serious issue for him. So, but fortunately he didn't really have any options. And as things evolved and developed, then Rubens became clearly the best choice, because we operated on a pretty tight budget in 2009, and the last thing we needed was to have cars broken or damaged, we ran on two chassis, two monocoques only for quite a large part of the season. And if we'd had one of the drivers break a monocoque, we would have been in serious trouble. So we opted in the end to ask Rubens to stay, which I think was a great decision by the team, because he was perfect. And so it's fate really that kept the two drivers in the team. They had no choice.
We operated on a laughably small budget. I mean, we got from the beginning of the year until the German Grand Prix, so it's sort of after the shutdown, summer shutdown period, and I remember our total expenditure had been just over £600,000, which I suspect some of the other teams were spending twice as that, per race. And we had to have, because we didn't have any money, and obviously the money that we did have through sponsorship and what have you, we didn't know how long we were going to have to operate on virtually no money. So anything we had, we just tried to eke out as long as possible. And it wasn't until the others started to catch up a bit. I remember towards the end of the year, we opened up the taps a little bit to have some improvements towards the end of the year. But basically, what we had at the beginning of the year, we had to race with, and we did without things that some of the other teams had, like KERS, just to keep the whole thing simple. But my overriding memory really was everyone mucked in, right from the start. After Honda told us the bad news, and then we told the staff the following week, there was a real sense of backs against the wall, and we've got no option. It's all too late, so we can't do anything else. So let's just sort of bash on, and everyone just got stuck in, and everyone did their job extremely well, and clearly. Ross spent the vast majority of his time, making sure that the car was the best it possibly could be, and myself and the finance guys and everyone else did the best we could to get the sponsorship that we did and eke the money out. But I think that it was a really outstanding job from the drivers to the mechanics to the people in the factory to the finance people and everyone else. Everyone really pulled their weight, and there was a real sense of we're in this together.
When did you decide to do it yourselves and rebrand it? Was it a sudden realization? Well, hang on, we have to do this now. This is the only option, or was it something that kind of grew over time as you thought it was a better and better idea?
Well, I know at the very beginning when Honda told us they were stopping, we mooted the idea around. We chucked the idea around. They said, "Well, no, that wouldn't make much sense. That's not very sensible. That's not a very sensible thing to do." And so that's when we set about trying to find a buyer. And then it got to the point where we thought, and in that process, to be honest, we started to understand more about what could or couldn't be done, because we were discussing things with the Honda board about what sort of structure would be possible going forward. Because, of course, Honda had a pretty major liability with all the people they had made redundant. Not making them redundant saved them a lot of cash. But could we restructure it? So it gave us some funds to run the year on. And as those ideas developed, and they probably developed as much because we were trying to put together viable options for purchasers, I guess our realization that maybe it could work grew to the point where Nick might have a note of it, but at some point we sat down and said, why don't we go for ourselves? Because it's really looking like the only option. Because the challenge, difficulty for me personally, and most of the people in the team, is the people we were seeing to buy the team are not people we wanted to work for. So even if we'd sold the team, we wouldn't want to work for them.
Of course, because you were ultimately looking for your boss, weren't you? And
potentially, yes. And we just, there weren't. You looked at these characters and you thought, well, maybe it could save a team, but there's not someone I want to work for. So that was the dilemma. But when was it, Nick? Do you remember?
I think the reality is that during the course of January of 2009, it became fairly clear that there wasn't a fairy godmother out there. That everyone we had met was dreadful to varying degrees, and didn't really have the right aspirations for the team. So I think it just gradually dawned on us that the only way we were going to get out of this problem was doing it ourselves. And it was I think it was a big decision, and certainly I remember Mrs. Fry and Mrs. Brawn not being impressed at all. I think they both felt that we were going to end up in caravans or a tent for the rest of our lives because this was all going to go horribly wrong, and they were probably right.
Well, I know my wife said, look, you can do it, but don't mortgage the house. And that was basically what the condition was. So
I think it's very easy to look back, and on occasions you get people say, "Oh, you were lucky," etc., etc. But we make light of it now because it all worked out brilliantly, and we hit a whole bunch of home runs. But it was more than likely to go the other way. I think all the evidence would suggest that this wasn't going to work, and what happened subsequently was really a dream come true, and we took a huge risk. And I think had it gone wrong, we would have been, I think, individually in not the best shape, to say the least. I think it would have been, really life-changing, but in the opposite direction. And we threw the dice and decided to go for it. And but then there was the next challenge. Really was, talking to a Japanese company about what was essentially a management buyout, because the minute that you, if in reality, declare your hand that you'd like the company, then you're on the other side of the negotiating table.
Effectively, you were not buying yourselves, but you were kind of sitting on both sides of the fence, weren't you? Must be quite a difficult position.
Yeah, we were in a difficult position. However, I think the relationships were pretty good. But Honda did, the correct things. They got their accountants to take a good look at, the numbers that we come up with, and in fact, they felt it could have been a lot worse than we portrayed, that the liabilities for closing down the team, if it had gone that way, were significantly more than we felt they were. So in fact, I think we played a straight bat, and I think they looked at the alternatives and they came up with exactly the same conclusions. So I think by the time we got to the beginning of February, I think it was in everyone's minds that there really wasn't another alternative, that they were either going to offload the team onto the management, or it would have gone under, and going under at that stage was it would have been a bitter blow for the British government as well. I mean, you've got to consider there were 700 people there. After it came out that the team, Honda, were going to pull out, I mean, it was on the front page of the Times newspaper the following Saturday. I mean, it was a real bellwether for the decline of the UK. Everything was going pear-shaped, and now, this very prestigious Formula One team with huge resources and a major car company was going under as well. So it was really seen as something which was an indicator of the way the UK was going. So I think everyone's intent, whether it be the staff, whether it be Honda, whether it be management, whether it be the government, we've got to find a way of solving this, because it's not something anyone wanted to happen.
No, I'm going to move on to to happier times, because obviously we've been talking so much about the disaster that was the end of 2008. I'm going to start we're now going to move into the 2009 season and all the success that came with it. But we touched on Rubens and Jensen. We've got a couple of photos here. The first one is with both of you with Rubens, the 257 Grand Prix from 2008 season. And then also just before Brazil at the end of the year, when he did finally clinch the championship. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the two drivers, because Ross, I mean, you knew Rubens so well from Ferrari. Jensen, I think you were undecided on, in terms of, until you actually got into a team with him there, you didn't know how good he was. What are your thoughts on the two?
Yeah, I mean, Rubens I like a lot, and he's very talented. He's very quick, actually. I think it's easy to underestimate, because he spent a lot of his time driving with Michael Schumacher, that how quick Rubens is. And he's he gives very good feedback. He's got a very good technical brain, and quite clear about what he feels and direction and so on. So he's a good driver to work with. He has a Latin temperament, which came out occasionally, but that's good fun most of the time. And he's a great race driver. I mean, he has very good feel for races, and doesn't rarely drops the ball. So he was definitely a real asset to the team. Jensen, I think, if I may say, the first year I was there, 2008, he may have been a bit intimidated by me, because I came to a team that he'd been in and become very comfortable with for a number of years, and I came along, and he made a few mistakes, and it was unusual for him, because a lot of the guys in the team would say to me, that's not Jensen, he's and I could see he was clearly very talented, but the first year he was a bit I don't want to say unsettled, or there were a few occasions when he did drop the ball, and I think it may well have been just me joining a team, him feeling a little bit intimidated, and but then you have to say in 2009, first half was tremendous. I think he felt the pressure a little bit then of being a championship favourite and being and lead a championship. And the second half got a little bit wobbly, and then he pulled it all together at the end of the year, and world champion, and deserved it. So very, very talented driver, extremely talented.
I was reading that actually just before this race in Brazil, I don't know whether it was to you, Nick, or to you, Ross, that Jensen was talking to one of you and he said, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay. We're going to sort it this race."
Well, he certainly said it to me. I don't know if he said it to you, Nick, but he'd had a bit of a wobbly practice because I think Vettel had gone out in Q1, which we were in the first qualifying, and Q3, sorry. Which we were in Q1. First qualifying.
Fishing for too long.
Yeah, I know, definitely. I don't think that's. I don't think you can go fishing for too long. But anyway, Vettel had dropped out in the first qualifying. It was wet, and we thought, well, that's good. And then Jensen proceeded to drop out in second qualifying. So I mean, he was barely in front of Vettel on the grid. But he did come to me and said, "Look, I've got my head together for tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm going to sort it." And he drove a tremendous race, fabulous race. And so, to be frank, in contrast to some of the races he had before that in the second half of the year, where Rubens won a couple of races in the second half of the year and showed the car in maybe not everywhere, but was still competitive enough to win races. But Jensen, I think, felt the pressure a little bit. First time he'd ever been in that situation, and you can't underestimate the pressure that drivers experience in those circumstances. So, but I say again, to his credit, he pulled it all together and got the job done.
Yeah. So it is just such an amazing story. Nick, it's quite an odd photo, this. So this is your cars having just arrived in Australia. And obviously by this time they did have engines. But what I quite like about this photo is it's got a little sign on the cover of the car saying "No engine fitted." Engine was obviously a big problem for you both, because Honda was obviously going to do the engine. It was the Honda team. You had an offer from Ferrari, if I'm right, and also an offer from McLaren and therefore Mercedes engines. I mean, I always thought the sort of Formula One paddock was known as the Prana pool. Why was everyone offering you engines?
They were very kind to us. After the fateful meeting with Honda at the end of November, the following week there was a team meeting led by Luca de Montezemolo, and Ross and I had elected to tell Luca ahead of telling the other teams, because he was the chairman of the team group at that stage. And the meeting was at the Browns Hotel in London the Wednesday after Honda had told us they wanted to pull out. And Ross and I were invited to his suite. And I remember to this day, obviously he had a tremendous relationship with Luca, but Luca sat there and said, "Look, we don't want you guys to go down. It's a really bad sign for Formula One. And if you need an engine, you can have a Ferrari engine. Brackets, and it'll cost you €8 million, but that was a different story. But he was kind enough to offer. It wasn't a Cosworth DFV price, was it? An engine just out the get-go, and we told the other teams that Honda was pulling out, and there was tremendous sympathy. It was a meeting where everyone was really down in the dumps because everyone was feeling the pressure. Obviously, at that time there was a lot of argy-bargy between the teams and the FIA and Bernie, and we were all trying to get on with each other very well. And Mercedes came along very shortly thereafter and made exactly the same offer. The simplest solution would be to have continued with the Honda engine, but Honda, really did feel that they were out. They were going to go. They weren't going to lend us an engine or sell us an engine. And I think the reality is that the reason we went with the Mercedes engine was that it fitted better. I remember the Ferrari engine, the mounting points were fundamentally different from the Honda. We also did feel, I think it's fair to say, that Mercedes would, let us win, let us beat McLaren if there was an opportunity to do so. I think possibly, Ross will know better than I, but Ferrari probably would have kept us in our place. What would have happened had we had a Ferrari engine, who knows? But the Mercedes engine certainly fitted better. But again, Ross will give the detail, but the Mercedes engine fitted, but it was still half an inch higher than the Honda engine. So the centre of gravity at the back of the car and where the final drive was a lot higher than it should have been. And even at that stage, we didn't really feel that we were going to be championship contenders. We had a car that had been kind of cobbled together in a relatively short period of time, and the engine fitted, but only just, and there were lots of compromises as a result of that. So when we actually did go testing, we thought we would be in a reasonable position, but to finish the tests, fastest by a margin, and I think the other teams felt that we were probably running light. And
what have we done?
the reality was, I think we were sandbagging and trying to keep the thing as slow as we possibly could.
Now, Ross, I think it was in Motorsport, and I think it was quite recently that Martin Whitmarsh. Nigel Roebuck went to go and interview him, and he said, well, in a way, I'm partly to thank for the 2009 championships because, I helped sort the Mercedes engines. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, McLaren had a veto right, and they could easily have stopped us having the engine, or in fact, it was McLaren who proposed we had the engine. So I think it was a tale of his time in that there was a dreadful economic crisis. Formula One was feeling the effect of that, and also there was FOTA had been formed, which was a sort of brotherhood of teams, which was pretty strong at the time. I mean, they were supporting each other. So undoubtedly, McLaren made a fair contribution to our success that year. Something which Ron Dennis never lets us forget, by the way. So,
nor Martin Whitmarsh, actually, through the pages of Motorsport.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. Ron says it in slightly different words.
I can imagine.
But to their credit, they did in very difficult times, they did concede the exclusivity they had. And it was partly logistical that we chose a Mercedes engine. But also the tendency at Ferrari was to give customers the previous year's engine, whereas we knew from Mercedes, I think they were supplying Force India at that time, we knew that they were giving the same engine to their customers as McLaren were getting. I mean, McLaren may well have had a few developments, but it was fundamentally the same. We had some mismatch issues. The gearbox, the output shaft, and the crank was higher on the Mercedes, so we had to lift the gearbox. So the gearbox was stuck up in the air.
It was, but that was by as much as 2 centimeters or something, wasn't it? Which doesn't sound a lot in the wider world, but in Formula One, you're always talking about microns and millimeters.
We were sweating blood to sort of lower the centre of gravity half a mil here and there, and then we had no choice but to stick the gearbox up. As you say, probably around 2 centimeters. I can't remember the exact number. It's substantial. But just going back a step, I think one of the great things about that period was how well everybody worked. And I think looking back on it, the key was to always keep the staff informed of where we were and what was going on. So every week we had a staff briefing. Of course, there were some things we couldn't tell them because, like the details of our investor, that our fraudulent investor. There's no point in worrying the staff about those things, but we did keep them informed of what was going on. And I was so impressed with the spirit that came, because they knew even if we were able to carry on, that a third of them would probably be made redundant, and almost to a man or woman, they just got their heads down. I mean, Dunkirk spirit, whatever you want to call it. They just got their heads down and worked so hard to get on and create that car. And there were only 1 or 2 people who said, this is not for me, which out of a staff of 700 is tremendous. And in fact, as the team regrew in later years, some of those people who were made redundant came back again. And they all enjoyed the success of the team. Nick and I had many letters and notes from people who we'd had to make redundant in order for the team to survive, writers, and say, I still feel proud of being a part of it, which we were proud of them as well. But it was tremendous spirit. It's something which I'll never forget, because it was such a inspiring time in many ways in what was a very, very difficult period.
And once you had this hugely difficult period, you got to the first test, and you're talking about sandbagging just there, Nick. When did you first think, "Oh, hang on a second, this might just work quite well"? Was it at that first test, or was it late? Even then, did you think, well, the other teams must be sandbagging? When did it first click?
Well, I think there was a build-up to it, and that during the year, the objective for 2009 had been to reduce downforce by 50%. So when the technical groups all sat down and their objective was to reduce downforce by 50%. I think the rules as we originally conceived them went a fair way towards that. But it became clear to me during 2008 that we were exceeding the objective by some margin. Now, I was the chairman of the technical group, and I think it was around August of that year, I said to the technical group, in fact said to some team principals in a meeting, we are exceeding our targets. Do we want to review the rules again, or are you all prepared to accept the consequences of not meeting the targets? Which we don't know what the consequences will be, but we're certainly exceeding the targets. And I'm sure looking around this room, there's going to be many people who know that they're exceeding what was supposed to be the objective for 2009. And nobody was interested. Nobody said. They all thought I was exaggerating for whatever motive, I don't know. But anyway, I was shot down in flames, and everyone carried on. Then we started to hear numbers from other teams, which is the nature of Formula One. People are struggling, they can't get the downforce, etc. And we were doing okay. Then the first test happened, which we didn't attend, and the lap times were nowhere near as good as we thought they should be. So we knew that we had a pretty good car on our hands, and that was another thing that I think motivated the troops. That we had a feeling the car would be competitive. And the first time Jensen, I think, drove it round Silverstone South, he said, "This feels pretty good." I remember at Barcelona we started the test, and it was the last. Did we do two tests? One test or two tests?
One test. We
did one test before the season started. First day at Barcelona, he goes out and does 5 laps or whatever, and we were a bit late starting because we were pretty difficult getting organised with what we had to do. And everyone else had been running, and they'd been running there the previous week. And he came in and said, "Oh, balance is dreadful, I've got too much understeer, this, that and the other." And Andrew Chauvelin said, "That's interesting, you're second quickest." He said, "Shut up, you don't be stupid, the car's terrible." And then as we started to get the car tuned in, I think on the last couple of days we were quickest, and we were always carrying fuel. We realised we had a pretty good car on our hand, and the last thing we needed to do was to aggravate the situation, because there was this controversy starting then about the diffuser designs. The last thing we needed to do was to aggravate the situation by taking the fuel out and going fast. So that was where we were.
I think the thing that I found, looking back, extraordinary is that, when you're kind of living through this, I wouldn't say it wasn't enjoyable, because it was obviously immensely enjoyable in one way, but you were so preoccupied with the survival of the team that, you were just running day by day. And, I remember on one occasion having a conversation with Ross, and one morning he said to me, "This doesn't do much for your libido, does it?" And and that was how it was. I mean, literally, it was so stressful.
I suppose sort of being quick and winning races obviously was the most important thing, but it was almost secondary to just making it day to day and keeping everyone employed.
And every day, I mean, we had so little money. My job, to run a weekend was about £1 million. So the task was, every weekend we had to, raise £1 million somehow. And you probably noticed through the course of 2009, the sponsors on the car changed, almost week by week. And it was like selling flowers. I mean, it was just what can we get in? And we would be doing deals, in the 2 weeks running up to a race, and we had Canon in Singapore as a one-off, and obviously Virgin in various guises all the way through the year, and different sponsors in Brazil. But it was literally hand to mouth, and I don't think there was no time to sort of sit back and reflect on the strategy or what was going to happen next, because there was always a priority for the following day or the following weekend. And we had some great times and great parties and what have you, but it was always on to the next thing of how are we going to keep this thing going. And we knew the others would catch up, because we were eking out what we had so sparingly, and with the resources that Ferrari had and Red Bull had and McLaren had, it was inevitable they were going to catch up. So, it was a real hand-to-mouth existence, which I think kept us awake 24 hours a day. And one of the bizarre things I remember was during the Monaco Grand Prix, when the guys were first and second, I was in the race office upstairs, and actually had a nap. I haven't told Ross this, but had a nap during the course of the race. But we were so goddamn tired, from trying to keep this thing going, that I was kind of woken up and told, you better get down onto the podium, and we've won.
Jensen's in
I
the
was
wrong
so
place and running
exhausted.
down the pit straight.
Absolutely.
Now, we have got some questions here from the motoring committee at the Royal Automobile Club. And Ross, you touched on it just there. This comes from Chris Anderson. And I should actually say at this juncture that in future talk shows, you will be able to ask questions yourselves. So watch out for that. But for now, Chris Anderson is talking about the loophole in regulations. They allowed the double diffuser, which was missed by most of the other teams. I think it was Toyota and Williams who had it as well. How important was this? If I could just preface that with, what is a double diffuser for us who are not engineers or designers or aerodynamicists? And then how much difference did it make? Would you have won without it?
I thought you might ask that, and I've almost got to go back through my notes to remember the exact interpretation, because basically it related to continuous surfaces and what was a continuous surface, and the idea was that under the new low downforce version, the height of the diffuser was controlled, but by having another diffuser and allowing the pressure from that diffuser to connect to the lower diffuser, you could get more performance out of the car. And in fact, it was a Japanese engineer who came up with the idea, because we were running, in 2008, we were running two wind tunnel programs in the UK and a wind tunnel program in Japan. And one of the Japanese engineers had come along with this concept and said, can we do this? And of course, we looked at it, and after a lot of debate, decided it was doable. And I think that was about the time that I started to raise the point with the working groups that maybe we should be looking at tightening up the regulations. And if it had gone further, then probably a double diffuser would have been stopped, because I assumed we weren't the only ones doing it. As it turned out, Williams and Toyota were also doing it. So, but coming along in August, for instance, the gearbox is pretty much conceived by then, is being built and so on. So we had a double diffuser, but I wouldn't say it was totally optimized around the car. It came along too late for us to do a fully optimized car. And I remember one of the arguments some of the other teams were making, well, you designed the car around it. We didn't, in fact, because we'd already designed the car when we had the idea. So that came along quite late. But it was pretty important at the beginning of the season. But let's not forget, Williams had it and Toyota had it, and they weren't winning races. So, I mean, we had a pretty good car. And the double diffuser was definitely the icing on the cake, and enabled us to certainly get a lead. And then Red Bull did it with all their resources, and Adrian's pretty smart cookie, and they got onto it. And of course, by the end of the year, they caught up, or maybe even were quicker than we were. But it was a pretty important element, and pretty, in amongst all the battles we were having, we then had a legal battle about the legality of the diffuser. And of course, that went to appeal. It was protested. Stewards kicked it out, went to appeal. If the appeal court had upheld the protest, we might be in a very different position today, because we would have lost the potentially lost the points of that season up until that point when the appeal happened. So it was pretty fraught. So along with all the other aggro we had this fight going on about the double diffuser. But interesting times.
I mean, it is amazing to think back to all. It is, there have been books written about it, of course, but it is sort of it's a thriller, isn't it? I'm just gonna sorry, just quickly. You mentioned the Japanese engineer. Was that a Super Aguri one, or was that a Honda engineer? Can you remember?
That was a Honda engineer. It was one who was working in the facility in Japan. So
okay. So it's another image here, and this is post-race in Australia. By this time, you knew the car was quick from testing, and amazingly, during testing, it was also really reliable as well, which you mentioned as well. Was this? Could you believe what you were seeing when your cars came into the pit lane after the race, having won, come first and second? I mean, just try and talk me through some of the emotions from both of you who were there, and you'd had such an awful winter and beginning of the year, and then for this to happen in Australia.
I think for me, when it really dawned was qualifying in Australia. The testing was one thing, and then on the Saturday we were first and second, and you remember there was a big rigmarole as well because Richard Branson came to the event, and in fact I'd had a late night with him on the Saturday night, and so by the time we got to the Sunday, I think we were pretty much running on empty. And there was huge emotion as well in that in parallel with the I arrived in Australia on the Thursday morning, and then we were up till I think 2 a.m. the following morning with the steward's inquiry, if I remember rightly. And then for my sort of sponsorship hat on, it was a late night with Branson on the Saturday night as well. So, I mean, it was almost just a huge relief and an outpouring of emotion, because the previous week we'd had to let go, 40% of the team. So in parallel with all of this, I mean, there was the emotion of, letting people go who, had put in great service, and thankfully a lot of them are back with the team now. So I think by the end of the race, I remember I think both Ross and I were in tears. It was just a huge sort of emotional oh my laws, from a position on the 28th of November the previous year. Almost 4 months later, we've gone from complete disaster, we're going to have to shut down, to first and second in the first Grand Prix by a margin. It was surreal.
I mean, it is an absolutely incredible story. So I keep saying that, but the more we talk about it, now. So over the run of the next 7 races, you won 6 of them. Vettel taking 1 win. There was then sort of a bit of dip in form, which we'll come to. But could you believe what was going on? I mean, even when you look at some of the most successful years with Michael at Ferrari, and the number of races he won, and looking at Hamilton at the moment, I mean, that's not even with the sort of the previous 4 months they'd had. I mean, Ross, you had so much experience of winning races and winning championships. I guess it was just business as usual once you got into it, or was it not? Did you just have to keep pinching yourself that this was?
Well, I think it was pretty special because of the circumstances that led up to it. I mean, the sort of extreme of emotions. It was a very special period. I think you win races because you've done a good job, and perhaps other people have done a bad job. And that was a year where, quite frankly, a number of key teams, Ferrari, McLaren, they got it wrong. They didn't get on top of the new regulations as quickly as or as well as they should have done, and so they all took half a year to get themselves sorted out. And so there was just this perfect storm in that we had a very good car. We'd got on top of the regulations. We've seen an interpretation that was good for us. We had a team that was buzzing because everyone had really worked so hard and so committed. 2 drivers who couldn't believe their luck, and they were really driving very well. So I mean, it was a perfect storm in our favour. Everyone else seemed to be off balance. We were on top of the job, and it was a pretty special first half of the year. And It's just this extremity of emotions that, as Nick said, we went from November, closes, turn the lights off as you walk out the door, to March time, April, beginning of the season, winning races. So very, very special.
I'm going to just move on to another couple of photos here. The Belgian Grand Prix, this I think in between Rubens' 2 wins that year. The second half of the year was much tougher. The reason why I've pulled these out is obviously Rubens' car on the left with fire extinguishers on it in the pit lane, and the McLaren mechanics helping again. And then Jensen out after a crash. I think it was very early in the Grand Prix, wasn't it? Was it first lap? If I'm not mistaken. How was there a dip in form, or was it other teams catching up? Was it Jensen stumbling a bit with the pressure of the World Championship? What can sort of explain the second half of the year? Was it lack of development, or?
I think you said it all, actually. I mean, there was lack of development because we didn't have the funding, and so there was some modest work going on, but there certainly wasn't the funding to really develop the car properly. I think you get these little blips anyway, and I'd been fortunate in having experience before. Just knew we kept our head down and kept everyone focused, made sure that people didn't get too nervous about what was going on. Then we could succeed. For sure, Jensen, I think, felt the pressure in the middle of the year. It was his championship to lose. And he had a few events, a few races that were pretty lackluster. He had a crash. But, they're going to come. It's very rare, even in great years, that you have 15, 16, 17 races that all run perfectly. I know there have been occasions, but it's pretty rare. Normally you've got to be prepared. And I think with having experienced it, I was able to convey that to the team. Look, this is fabulous, but we've got to be prepared for when we have a bit of a dip or when we have a problem. Just keep working hard. Just focus on what you've been doing. You've proven you can do it. And then it will come out the other side. We did. I think we won Monza. You've got a list.
I've got some here, actually. Valencia and Monza. Yeah, here we go.
Which was sort of, they were pretty vital later in the year to revive faith and confidence in the team.
I don't think, if I remember rightly, no one believed that Rubens was fit enough to get to the end in Valencia, wasn't it? If you remember, it was an incredibly hot day, wasn't it? And I think Jock Clear did the most wonderful job, just kind of coaxing him through the last few laps, because I think Rubens was worn out by that stage. It was a boiling hot day, and Jock did a wonderful school teacher job keeping him going. But Rubens did a great job at the end of the year, and obviously Monza was special as well.
Yeah. So.
Was there a wry smile from you, Ross, with obviously your time at Ferrari and that coming at Monza, or did that not even cross your mind? Your
Monza's
mind?
a very special place to win a race. Very special for me. Very special for Rubens, because he'd been at Ferrari as well, and there's just huge passion at Monza. And I think because it was Rubens, and maybe because I'd been involved with Ferrari and left Ferrari and good terms of fans, were fantastic. Everyone. That was the nice thing about 2009. Everyone seemed to enjoy the success. It's a bit like Leicester City in the Premiership. Everyone just seemed to enjoy our success. We didn't have any real negativism from any of the, even the other teams, especially the working part of the teams. There may have been the odd team principal there who had a gripe with us, but I remember, I think. Was it one of the races where Rubens won? The whole pits, everybody's pit crew was out in the pits cheering him as he came through the pits, and that was a lot to do with Rubens. But I think, everyone enjoyed our success, certainly at working level, and everyone, it was a great story. So, but in that season, we had a little revival in the second half, which kept us going long enough to get the job done.
I'm just going to move on to one where we're running short of time. And there's sort of so much that we haven't covered, but I think this photo here is a great one of you with Jensen having just clinched the title. in terms of your career's work, both of you, I'll come to you, Nick, first. Where does this experience rate? Surely it's near or if not the top. And then the same question to Ross as well, with your time at Benetton, Ferrari, Brawn, and then Mercedes. Nick, where is this?
Oh, it's clearly, well up there. I mean, it was very different from things I'd experienced before. I mean, I'd been at Aston Martin for a long time and, rescued that a couple of times from pretty difficult situations. We had some great achievements at Ford in terms of some great products and what have you. But I think in terms of, really taking something from the ashes, this was up there. And I think Ross has touched on it a couple of times. It was the relationship between everyone within the team. I mean, Jensen and I had gone back a long way, and there'd been lots and lots of hard times, and cajoling him along, through 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008 was really tough work, and this was payback time, and it didn't matter whether you were a gearbox fitter, a driver. Everyone had great times, and everyone was really in it together. And we kind of walked the talk. I mean, we had no money whatsoever, as I've said before. And I remember at the Valencia Grand Prix, we won the race, and then Ross and I were in seats 34A and B at the back of an EasyJet flight to Luton with all the fans, and it was great. And we arrived back at Luton Airport at about 3:00 in the morning, and the fans on the plane couldn't believe it. It was like you guys were just winning the Grand Prix, and now you're with us.
How long did it take them to realise that they just sat down next to you two?
Oh, not well. We got mobbed in the airport because you're in the EasyJet queue. It was really good fun, as Nick said. It was a fabulous time, and so everybody seemed to enjoy the success. And it wasn't intentional. I mean, if you wanted to structure a sort of a PR campaign, you'd send your executives off to travel EasyJet because that would look really cool. But that was necessity. It wasn't an intended strategy. But it was actually really good fun. I mean, we were riding a wave, and it was really good fun to get close to the fans, talk to the fans. They buy you a drink, or they want to buy you a drink. You have to be careful, far too much to drink. But anyway, it was a really great experience, and all part of the whole thing.
I think what was the exciting bit was really a lot of stuff that people don't see, in that there was all this racing stuff going on, but through the year, we knew we couldn't continue like this. I mean, it wasn't going to continue like that. There were two, relatively ordinary blokes who had inherited this Formula One team because there was no alternative. But what was going to come next? So running in parallel with all of this was, 2009's great, but there was a big risk that we were going to go bust, at the end of the 2009 season. And so, we had to find another solution. And obviously, as we did, better on the track, people became more attracted to the team. And, fortunate enough to have a few people who wanted to invest in the team. But, there were several stories running in parallel. And, towards the end, obviously the relationship with Mercedes-Benz, we managed to hit a home run with Petronas as sponsors. Obviously, a separate story there of the hiring of Michael, which started off, from what I remember, as a discussion in a nightclub, didn't it? Ross and I were dancing on the floor, and Michael was there, and it was, hey Ross, why don't you go and have a discussion with him, see if he fancies to go at this for next year? And of course he did. But there were so many things running all in. Absolutely, that's where the conversation started, wasn't it?
Absolutely amazing. So, finally, Ross, describe where does it? I mean, you had so much success at Ferrari with Michael, and success at Benetton again with Michael, but your name was on the lid, as it were, with this one, and all the experience. Does this outweigh them?
I mean, first of all, my name was on the car, which was mildly embarrassing, but actually I was extremely proud of. And it was the idea of the management team, Nick and the other people, in that we had a management group as well as the normal management, who had been the nucleus of the team surviving, and we were all shareholders, and we kicked around lots of names to the team, and eventually I say to my mild embarrassment, but I was very proud of it, the others suggested we should call it Brawn GP. And so that was a great honour. And I think with everything else that went on, with the fact we rescued the team, the fact we won the championship with no money, the fact we then were able to acquire Mercedes as the investors and holders of the team, and the fact that's now gone on to such great success, I think one would have to say this is the pinnacle of my career, so far anyway. Who knows? But I have been lucky in having some very special times. The first Drivers' Championship for Ferrari for a long time. My relationship with Michael was very, very special, so I don't want to undermine that. But I say just all the events that surrounded this. If you'd said to me 18 months earlier, you're going to be owner of a team and you're going to win the World Championships, you'd say crazy. There was some books have been written, as you said, but also we had some approaches for films to be written, and it was this thing. Well, this script wouldn't be believed if it wasn't true, because it just couldn't happen. Couldn't happen that a team in those circumstances would win the World Championship. It would just seem to, it just seemed like a fantasy. So it was. That's a long way of saying yes. It was a pinnacle of my career.
I must admit, I don't think I can do a better note to end on myself. So I think we should stop there. But there was a phrase that you used earlier, and I've got it in my notes here. But I hadn't even used it, and it's just funny. And I called it the perfect storm. And I think 2009 was the most wonderful perfect storm. Both of you, thank you so much for coming down here and joining me for such a long time and giving so many amazing anecdotes to that incredible year. Thank you both, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back next month with another Royal Automobile Club talk show, and we'll see you then. Goodbye for now.